Welcome to Crash Course U.S. History. In this episode, we'll cover the period after the Civil War called the Reconstruction Era. The Reconstruction Era covers the period between 1865 to 1877 in context of U.S. history. This period covers the post-Civil War era and the rebuilding of the U.S. It was also known as the period of great pain and endless questions posed by the Union and Confederation. The Reconstruction was also looking to grant freedom to the 4 million slaves who were forced into labor in the South. This could also be seen in the Civil Rights Act of 1875.
In March 1861, Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th President of the United States. Abraham Lincoln was naturally anti-slavery, saying that, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong. I cannot remember when I did not think and feel in order to stop the spread of slavery." He pushed for the 13th Amendment to ensure the freedom of all enslaved people in the border states. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment of crime, wherefore the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place in subject for their jurisdiction.
After the amendments were passed, slaves were protected by the Constitution and were considered free men and free women. The Civil War provided the end of slavery through the amendments, and the Republicans adopted codes that would restrict their rights, control their movements, and their labor. These were known as the Black Codes. They were placed to create a prominent line between the rights of the blacks and the whites by prohibiting blacks from renting land or borrowing money to buy land.
Everything was looking up for Lincoln until, of course, he was shot on April 14, 1865. This daring assassination was carried by a man named John Booth, who was a famous actor as well as a Confederate sympathizer, not exactly the type of person that would support Lincoln. Initially, Booth's plan was to kidnap the president. However, when that plan failed, Booth decided to take his life instead.
Lincoln's death was devastating because of all the things he had done for the slaves. Soon after his death, however, the Black Codes were put into effect and limited the rights of African Americans that Lincoln had fought for. The new freedmen were pretty much forced into agricultural jobs in which they worked the land of a wealthy landowner. They were forced to give half or more of their grown crops to the landlords in exchange for some necessities. This was known as sharecropping. However, despite the efforts to restrict the rights of African Americans with the Black Codes, groups such as the Freedmen's Bureau helped them protect the newly freed African Americans to find a new way of life which included jobs, homes, and education.
Now time for the thought bubble.
The Freedmen's Bureau was a government program that was formed to help the 4 million newly freed slaves get back into the workplace by providing them with jobs, education, food, and shelter. This was supposed to later help the economy as there would be a surplus of African Americans entering the workplace. However, this would not work out as planned because white supremacist groups such as the KKK and laws such as the Black Codes were created to restrict African Americans' rights.
Andrew Jackson was elected into office in 1865 and became the 17th U.S. President. He became the president after the assassination of Lincoln. He believed in people's natural rights, equal protection of the laws, as experienced in the 14th Amendment of our Constitution. To further summarize the 5 sections of the amendment is that it grants the citizenship to all persons born of naturalized in the United States.
On February 26, 1869, the 15th Amendment stated that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States, or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This amendment was a major step towards equal rights for African Americans in the U.S. But despite the amendment saying that people would not be denied the right to vote based on race, Southerners found other ways to restrict African Americans from voting.
As all these positive movements for African Americans took place, a far more sinister movement started to make itself known more and more. The Ku Klux Klan was a racist movement that favored whites and despised African Americans. The group became very popular in what had once been the South. It was founded in 1866, but they only started to gain traction 2 years later in 1868. The KKK used political terrorism to intimidate people and also used extreme violence, such as murder and burning down buildings.
During the Reconstruction period in the South, the white Southerners who supported Reconstruction right after the American Civil War were called scallywags, and the Northern newcomers were called carpetbaggers. During this period, the carpetbaggers were mostly people that had left the North and went to the South after the war, and the scallywags worked with freemen and carpetbaggers to take control of the government. Most of the Northerners were moving south because they wanted to start new businesses.
Some of these scallywags would go on fights for equal rights, such as Samuel F. Phillips.
As a Democrat, Andrew Johnson worked his way up to veto the Civil Rights Act of 1875 by Republican Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. This act provided African Americans equal treatment at any circumstances, but mainly focused on public transportation. This could be seen in the court ruling Marbury versus Brown. Also, there were 11 other charges against him. Therefore, Johnson became famous to be known as the first president to be impeached while in office.
In 1876, there was a highly disputed presidential election between Samuel J. Tilden, who was a Democrat, and Rutherford B. Hayes, who was a Republican. The dispute was over who would win the election, since Tilden had 184 electoral votes to Hayes' 165. The 20 votes remained uncounted. An informal deal was struck to resolve the dispute, the Compromise of 1877, which awarded all 20 electoral votes to Hayes In return for the Democrats' acceptance of Hayes' election, the Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, thus ending the Reconstruction Era of the United States. They would also build a Southern Transcontinental Railroad.
We personally think that the Reconstruction period was a success because it helped reunite the Union and destroy the Confederacy for good. This perspective is obviously just looking at the broader picture. Groups such as the KKK that came as a result of the Civil War drastically affected the Reconstruction period. Reconstruction promoted industrialism, ended slavery, gave rights and citizenship to newly freed slaves under Lincoln's presidency.